Hello and welcome to Written Words. This week is Out and About week. Are you feeling thirsty? Come with me for a little drive around Lincolnshire and let's take a look at some of the pubs in my local area. The pub, or public house, has played a significant role in British society and people's everyday lives for many hundreds of years. It's a meeting place where you can get together to relax with family and friends or chat with colleagues in a more informal environment. It's a place where you can avail yourself of refreshments, celebrate, commiserate, or even negotiate business deals. However, they sometimes do have their more sordid side, since the effects of the alcohol they serve can lead to indiscretions and misdemeanours, and the business deals are not always of a wholesome nature. Pubs, inns and taverns have been around for centuries, dating back to at least medieval times and beyond. The wonderfully inventive names of pubs and their often beautifully illustrated signs hark back to times when most people were illiterate, so the picture on the sign needed to be easily identifiable. There are certain categories of names which are particularly popular, and the names themselves often give us clues about the area where it's located. For example, some are named after historical figures or events. For example, the Svein Forkbeard, which tells us something about the town's Viking links. Or the Dambusters, which is a clue to the area's activities during the Second World War. Some pubs have royal connections. It's possible that royalty may have passed this way at some stage in the past. Or the land may have belonged to royalty. There are also a lot of pubs named after animals. It could be that the animal is connected with the area. For example, if it's a farming area, it may be a farm animal. Or it may be an animal that is found in the wild in the area. Or it might be connected with pursuits involving animals such as racing, hunting, fishing, and so on. There have been many famous pubs in literature as well, including the Prancing Pony in The Lord of the Rings, the Admiral Benbow Inn in Treasure Island. In the Harry Potter series, there is the Leaky Cauldron, the Three Broomsticks and the Hog's Head. And a selection of pubs around Oxfordshire provided inspiration for the Inspector Morse books, which we'll have a look at in a moment. Sometimes pubs are portrayed as cheery, welcoming places, while at other times they can be more dubious establishments frequented by shady characters. The TV soap opera is a very integral part of British culture, and the three most popular of these all feature a pub. In Coronation Street, it's the Rover's Return. In EastEnders, it's the Queen Victoria, known as the Queen Vic. And in Emmerdale, it's the Woolpack. Let's look at the words to an old music hall song about a pub. It's about a real pub which still stands in London today. Come, come, come and make eyes at me, down at the old Bull and Bush. Come, come, drink some port wine with me, down at the old Bull and Bush. Hear the little German band, da 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 da, just let me hold your hand, dear. Do, come and have a drink or two, down at the old Bull and Bush. If we go by the words of this song, the old Bull and Bush is one of the cheerier sorts of pub. It's the kind of place where you can meet your sweetheart and have a nice time with them. And if you'd like to hear a recording of this song, I have attached a link to the worksheet that goes with this lesson. I mentioned a moment ago that the Inspector Morse books feature quite a number of pubs in the Oxfordshire area. And the one that we're going to look at is the Black Prince in The Last Bus to Woodstock. The Black Prince is a real pub in Woodstock in Oxfordshire. And at the beginning of this book, it is the scene of a murder. So Inspector Morse is called in to investigate. Inspector Morse is rather fond of pubs, as you will know if you've read any of the books in this series or seen the TV series which was made from the books too. This being the first book in the series, at the beginning of the story we are introduced to Sergeant Lewis, who is about to become Morse's assistant and will remain his assistant for the whole series. And the relationship between the two men is very interesting. So let's take a look at a scene in The Black Prince and have a look how Colin Dexter portrays both of these characters. Did you never do any Latin? No, sir. Do you think I'm wasting your time, Lewis? Lewis was nobody's fool and a man of some honesty and integrity. Yes, sir. An engaging smile crept across Morse's mouth. He thought they would get on well together. Lewis, I want you to work with me on this case. The sergeant looked straight at Morse and into the hard grey eyes. He heard himself say he would be delighted. This calls for a celebration, said Morse. Landlord? Westbrook had been hovering outside and came in smartly. A double whisky. Morse pushed his glass forward. Would you like a drink, sir? The manager turned hesitantly to Lewis. Sergeant Lewis is on duty, Mr. Westbrook. When the manager returned, Morse asked him to assemble everyone on the premises, including staff, in the largest room available, and, drinking his whisky in complete silence, skimmed through the remaining pages of the newspaper. Do you read the Times, Lewis? No, sir, we take the Mirror. It seemed rather a sad admission. So do I sometimes, said Morse. So what can we tell about the two characters from this short episode? The extract begins with the question, did you never do any Latin? The books are set in Oxford, Oxford being the home of Oxford University, one of the most prestigious universities in the world, and Morse styles himself as an old-school intellectual. Just before this extract, he's trying to solve the cryptic crossword in the Times newspaper, which is a fiendishly difficult crossword, which Morse loves because it's an intellectual challenge. So when Lewis answers, no, sir, we've immediately got a contrast from the intellect of Morse to the more everyday Lewis. He hasn't studied Latin. He is, we are told, a couple of lines later, nobody's fool and a man of some honesty and integrity. So he's not stupid, but nor is he intellectual. And then we have a hint of Morse's sense of humour, which doesn't come out very often in the books. He keeps his sense of humour under wraps most of the time. But we're told an engaging smile crept across his mouth. So he was amused by that comparison, and we're told he thinks they're going to get on well together. Then the author tells us that Morse's eyes are hard and grey, so that contradicts that engaging smile. He's got hard grey eyes, so underneath the smile is a very hard, serious interior. The kind of hard, serious interior you probably need if you're going to be an inspector solving murder cases. So then Morse decides it's time for a celebration, they need a drink, and he orders a whisky, a double whisky for himself. But when the landlord offers to get a drink for Lewis, Morse butts in and says, no, he's on duty. As becomes clear throughout the books, in Morse's mind there is one rule for him and a different rule for Lewis. And there is also some irony here. He's celebrating with a whisky, but he's at the scene of a murder. He's come here actually to investigate a murder. Yet he's calling for a drink to celebrate. And then we have another contrast. He asks Lewis if he reads the Times, and Lewis says no, he reads the Mirror. And we're told it seems a rather sad admission. Why does he seem sad at admitting he reads the Mirror? If you've seen our earlier video about British newspapers, you will know that the Times is a broadsheet newspaper and the Mirror is a tabloid. The Times is a higher quality, more intellectual paper, whereas the Mirror is a more popular newspaper which favours stories about celebrities and so on. So again, we have a contrast between Morse and Lewis. Morse, who reads the Times, Lewis, who reads the Mirror. However, right at the very end, we do have a gentle admission from Morse that he does sometimes read the Mirror. He's not all intellectual. Anyone who's been on any writing course or read books about writing will have heard the maxim, show, don't tell. And this extract has some good examples of the difference between showing and telling. If the author tells the reader everything, it means that the reader is spoon-fed all the information. Nothing is left for them to figure out for themselves. Whereas if we show the reader things, we show the reader what things look like, what happens, what things sound like, what people do, but not necessarily telling them outright what they're thinking and how they're feeling. For example, I could tell you that my character was happy. Alternatively, I could show you my character was happy by describing the expression on their face. Maybe their eyes lit up, or they smiled, or perhaps they changed the way they were talking to become more animated. So the reader can figure out for themselves that that person is happy, rather than just being told in plain language, he was happy. So in this extract, there are some examples of telling. For example, the author tells us Lewis was nobody's fool and was a man of some honesty and integrity. So he's stating outright what Lewis's character is. As we go through the book, we can figure that out for ourselves. We can see what he does, what he says, how he responds to Morse and to the situations he's in. And we can probably figure out for ourselves that he is nobody's fool and he is a man of some honesty and integrity. But this is the beginning of the book, so Colin Dexter wants us to know that information from the beginning, so he just states it outright. But when it comes to showing, the author does a lot more of that here. He shows the contrast between the two characters by showing us that one can speak Latin and the other one can't. One reads the Times and the other reads the Mirror. One helps himself to a whiskey, but doesn't let the other one have a drink. We're not told outright that Morse is more bossy and Lewis is subservient to him, but we're shown that by their actions. So there is a little bit of telling in here because it's necessary just to get the story going, but for the most part there is a lot of showing. For our language focus, let's take a look at the word pub and some of its synonyms and some of the nuances between the different terms. In Britain, the most common word to describe this kind of establishment is a pub. Pub is short for public house, meaning it's a place where members of the public can go to meet together and have a drink. And it's where alcoholic drinks are sold, especially beer, and nowadays many of them also provide food. An inn is the same as a pub. Often pubs in the countryside are called inns, and sometimes they will also provide accommodation. So inn is essentially interchangeable with pub. A tavern is an old-fashioned word for a pub. It comes from the Latin taberna, and because it's an archaic term, it's quite popular in fantasy writing because it gives the writing a more medieval type of feel to it. A hostelry is another old term for a pub or an inn, and it means an inn or a pub which usually provides some kind of lodging. And when it is used nowadays, it does have an old archaic feel to it, and it can be used in a humorous context too. A post house came from the days before we had cars, when people used horses to travel. A post house was an inn or a pub where horses were kept, so that post riders or travellers could hire horses or change horses over if their horses were tired. So you could stop, have a drink, have something to eat, maybe spend the night there, and then carry on your journey with fresh horses. A boozer is modern British slang for a pub. Booze is the slang word for alcoholic drinks, so it's where you can drink booze. Down the boozer. A bar is a much more generic term for any kind of establishment that sells alcoholic drinks. If you are in a pub, the bar is the part of the pub where you go to order your drinks. It's the counter that you go up to order your drinks. And now for our writing prompt. Let your imagination take you to the pub and imagine a scene taking place in that pub. Take a look around you. What are the people like? What is the decor like? Is it light and airy, or is it dark and dismal? Is it a cheery place, or is it a sinister place? Are there happy things going on, or are there more dubious things taking place there? Give full rein to your imagination and write down the scene that unfolds in your imaginary pub. As usual, there is a worksheet to go with this lesson, and the full set of worksheets for lessons 11 to 20 and lessons 1 to 10 are now available to download from our website at writtenwords.uk. Thank you very much for joining me in this lesson. I look forward to seeing you in the next one, and in the meantime, happy writing!